got my motor running for a wild weekend. It's finally Friday, I'm out of control. Forget the working blues and let the good times roll.
Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Free-for-All Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is May the 11th in the year of our Lord 2018. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love us. He does love us. And we do what we do here at the Dan Clements Show. Knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade folks of the truth. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Today's show I entitled The Need for a Moral Citizenry. God Save the Republic. This week I've been dealing with some issues on, not issues as far as getting on Twitter or anything like that, but issues of people bringing things up on Twitter, especially those that are not learned in the scriptures. And yet they feel the need, because they are intelligent, they feel the need to talk about the scriptures. And every one of them on Twitter, and I won't say who it was doing it, same guy was doing it, it was a man, said that he was intelligent, but he took every scripture that he was posting up there to defeat Christianity, defeat God's Word, and defeat the Bible, took every one of them out of context. Would not keep them in context at all. And when I tried to put them back in context and explain to him in context using, original language and dictionaries and stuff like that, he wasn't having none of it. He was unwilling, totally unwilling to reason it out with somebody. He thought his way was the right way because he was an intelligent man, and anybody that believed in God and the Bible was not an intelligent person. And I got to laugh at that type of mentality. And it's a humanistic mentality. We are living in a humanistic era in the United States today. We're living in a post-Christian, post-modern era. And our morality as a nation, our morality as individuals, has fallen off a cliff. Has really fallen off the cliff. Now, I'm not sitting here preaching from the ivory tower saying that I don't have my faults and I don't have my sins and I don't have my struggles that I struggle with each and every day, folks. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I forgot to turn my cell phone off or mute everything off. Sorry about that, folks. I am a sinner, but I'm a saved sinner. And yes, I do struggle with sins, just like every other man and woman on the face of this earth, whether they're a saved Christian or not, whether they've been baptized into Christ or not. We have moral struggles that we struggle with each and every day. But to sit there and claim knowledge and claim understanding of the Bible when you don't have it to begin with, I think is the height of hubris and shows how little intelligence you actually have. Because it wasn't too many years ago, we're only talking a couple hundred years ago, that the Enlightenment happened. And the founders of our country and the framers of our Constitution were learned men. And one of the books that they said that man or woman had to read in order to become educated was the Bible. That was part of the requirement for education. You had to be educated, and the Bible was part of that education. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And today we live in a society where, again, folks that seem to be moderately intelligent or highly intelligent reject the idea of God, reject the idea of creation, reject the idea of the Bible. Especially this gentleman I was working with on Twitter. He rejects the whole notion of the Bible being inspired. He just said it's written by fallible men. And I asked him to explain to me, how did fallible men write 66 books, 40 authors over a span of 1,500 years? And the continuity in the Bible is astounding. I said, how did that happen? Of course, they can never explain that. And they never, I don't think they ever will be able to explain that at all. I don't think they'll be able to do that. I think one of the things that they fall flat on is their own ignorance. And so rather than take on the scriptures, how they should be studied, proper hermeneutics, looking at the Bible like you would any other book, asking the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I did an episode years and years ago, it seems like, but I did an episode on the show talking about, let me write this down here real quick, talking about what's called literary vehicles. And I'll put this in the show notes page, which you can find over at danclementshow.com. Literary vehicles are the different types of literature, or the vehicles in order to convey a message, I guess would be probably the better definition of that, like a hyperbole, or this is actually literal, or whatever. And like I said, I'll look that up for you and put a link to the show notes page about that. I don't know if I did a show or an article, but whatever it is, I'll actually put that up there. But they claim that, well, you say the Bible's totally literal. What about this passage? And they always go to passages that are hyperbole, where they're using some extreme, like if your hand offends you, cut it off. That's a hyperbole. God and Christ do not want you to cut your hand off. What they want you to do is look at sin as so extreme that it's better to cut your hand off than sin. It's a hyperbole. That's how they want you to look at sin. And I went back to the mote in your eye, taking the speck out of somebody else's eye, or some translations has a beam in your eye and you're trying to take a splinter out of somebody else's eye. That's not literal. And I go to those things and I said, what about this passage? Same type of language, just using an extreme example or some type of just over-the-top illustration to make a point. And yet they can't answer you. Well, don't bog down with this or that. Or the funniest one I get, and this is mostly from Catholics, and I actually was dealing with a Catholic last week or this past week about this. He didn't want me to use what's called proof text. He said, "Oh, you're just using proof text." Yeah. All I have is the Bible. It's all I need. And even my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, when he was talking to Satan after his fasting, his 40 days of fasting, when Satan took him up on a high mountain, what did Jesus use? He used proof text to dispute what the devil was saying, what Satan was saying to him. Wow. The apostles used proof text throughout their teachings, throughout their epistles. Jesus Christ, throughout his whole ministry, cited proof texts of the Old Testament, cited out of the book of Isaiah and other Old Testament books, especially in the prophecy and other places. And yet we have this modern humanist, intelligent people who reject God out of hand, reject religion, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. And this is part of the need for a moral citizenry, because you cannot. John Adams talked about this, and some other the framers of constitutions and the founders of our country talked along these same lines. You cannot have the type of government we have, a republic, not a democracy, a republic. You cannot have a republic without a moral citizenry. It doesn't work. Can't happen. Because if you don't have any morality, especially a higher morality than what men come up with, then we're just going to fall short. And chaos is going to ensue. All sorts of atrocities are going to happen. And then when we look back on this time period, it's going to be, if we allow it to happen, if we allow humanism to take total control, which it hasn't yet, but it's heading that way, we allow humanism to take total control of everything, it'll turn into a very barbaric, Anranian, dystopic future. A 1984. Fahrenheit, 954. Any of the dystopic futures, the Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. You just take your pick. Stalinist Russia, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Hitler's Germany. This is what happens when humanism takes over and says that there is no God and pushes morality out of the way, and the only God that humanism has is the state or government is their God. And that morality can be whatever you want it to be. And there's no limits on it. And we've seen that in the past century. Upper estimates of the deaths by fascism, Marxism, socialism, communism is 250 million people in the last century. Hundreds of millions of people died because of the morality that these systems have. And they don't have any higher morality than man. So that's why I say there is a great need for a moral citizenry, and not just a fake. And we're going to talk about this in the Bible lesson this morning, the short Bible lesson. I don't normally read these on air anymore. I hope that you go over to the danclemenshow.com on the show notes page for episode 981, and you click on these and read them for yourself and try to study them out. But I think it's important today to talk about this one that we're coming up to. Okay, well, let's get into the show here real quick then. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 119, verses 33 through 24. Teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes, and I shall keep it to the end. Give me understanding, and I will keep your law. Indeed, I shall observe it with my whole heart. The psalmist is asking God to teach him. Teach him God's ways. Because he knows his ways isn't working. He knows his ways are not going to work at all. Today's quote meal, which for some reason it didn't want to do. Let me get this back up again. I do apologize for that, folks. Today's quote meal. Life offers many choices. Eternity offers only two. Author unknown. We talked about this in a video I had about this Baptist preacher said that there's more than Jesus isn't the only way to heaven. And the whole New Testament, if you look at the whole New Testament, there's only two ways. There's the wide gate and the narrow gate. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except by him, John chapter 14. So we see, and this, my friends, in today's language, or what we're talking about in humanism today, what we're talking about trying to save our republic, you got two choices. Either you follow the humanist model, which is one way, or you follow God's model of morality, which is the second way, which is the better way. And I'm totally convinced of that. I'm totally convinced that God's way is the best way. Now, the short Bible lesson this morning comes from Al Shannon over at biblicalproofwordpress.com, and it's entitled Counterfeit Christians. And it's, like I said, this is very, very good read here, real short. The church today is important because its pews are filled, or impotent, excuse me. The church today is impotent because its pews are filled with lukewarm, half-hearted, counterfeit Christians who have never or intend to repent. It is filled with people who are living sinful lives, who are okay with doing just enough to pass a Christian. They're just going through the motions of organized religion, people who are playing church. These are they who, if Christianity became a crime, would never be convicted because of lack of evidence. Churches are filled with the worldly, the greedy, the apathetic, the holier-than-thous, the I am better than yous, the gossipers, the worriers, the profane, the sexually immoral, the addicted, the hateful, the bitter, the mad, the proud, the stingy, the mean, and the unforgiving. It's time to acknowledge our sinfulness and confess our sins. It is time to be pure in heart, Psalm 66:18. It is time to get rid of our hang-ups, bad habits that are slowly destroying our lives. It's time to get rid of all the bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 31 through 32. It is time to do the will of God. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Matthew chapter 7, verses 22 through 23. Do you know why Jesus will say, depart from me, even though they have prophesied, cast out demons, and done many other great works in heaven? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Matthew 7:21. As Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Matthew 26:39. He's talking about not his will, but God's will. We must submit to all of God's word, hear it, believe it, obey it fully without adding any man-made doctrines if we are to escape the warnings of Matthew 7:15 through 23. Make no mistake about it, on Judgment Day there will be elders, deacons, teachers, preachers, song leaders, etc., along with countless others that will be turned away because they didn't know the Lord. Matthew chapter 13, verses 3 through 9 and 18 through 23. I tell you today, there are wolves in sheep's clothing in the church ready to devour the flock. I tell you today, there are counterfeit Christians in the church masquerading as true children of God, but they are troublemakers who want to disrupt the progress being made in the kingdom. I tell you today that there are tares amongst the wheat in every church, noxious weeds that are poisoning the church. One of the marks of a true Christian is that he hears God. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. John 10:27. The Lord doesn't know anyone he doesn't hear. The Lord doesn't know anyone who doesn't hear his voice. You cannot be a Christian unless you hear his voice. Everyone on the side of truth listens to Jesus. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. John 18:37. A faithful witness hears the voice of God. How? They hear the word of God. So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Romans 10:17. Are you a counterfeit Christian? If so, stop and turn to God. That is why the Lord says, turn to me now while there's time. Give me your hearts. Come with fasting, weeping, and mourning. Don't tear your clothing in your grief, but tear your hearts instead. Return to the Lord your God, for he is a merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. He is eager to relent and not punish. Joel 2:12 through 13. In the end, only those who have obeyed the gospel of Christ shall be saved. Mark 16:16. In the end, only those who continue in the doctrine of Christ and his apostles shall be saved. Acts 2:42, 2 John 9. In the end, only those who endure trials and persecution for the cause of Christ shall be saved. James 1:12. In the end, only those who remain faithful unto death shall be saved. Revelation 2:10. In the end, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God. Romans chapter 14:11 through 12. Now, it's that important, folks, that we understand what a counterfeit Christian is. It's that important that we understand what needs to be done in order to be a moral being. Now, I haven't laid out the argument about Christian morality and humanist morality, but I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that in just a few minutes. I want to share this other article with you from CNS News by Terrence P. Jeffrey, best-selling author, America Needs a Great Awakening. Now, this is an interview, and I'm only going to read the first couple paragraphs of it, but I think it's very important. Now, the author is George Weigel. George Weigel, author of the best-selling 2-volume biography of Pope John Paul II, argues in his new book, The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections on Turbulent Times, that for America to maintain a political culture that protects liberty, it must first rebuild the moral culture needed to sustain the political culture. Now, I'm not arguing, and George Weigel, he's Catholic, and he's arguing from a Catholic standpoint. I don't agree with what Catholics teach about God and religion, but there's some good points that George Weigel makes here that I want you to understand about this, that in order for America to maintain a political culture that protects liberty, it must first rebuild the moral culture needed to sustain that political culture. We're going to talk a little bit today about some other articles about this National Popular Vote Compact and what happened in the news this week with Connecticut. And in my opinion, the immorality of that, and actually the unconstitutionality of it also, not including that. We're going to talk about some other things that have happened in the news lately and some things we found out, or at least I found out, and you may not know about them yet. George goes on to say, my point in the book, Weigel says, in an interview with CNSnews.com, is to explain just how deep the problem is, how we got there, and let us understand that while politics can help create the space for cultural renewal, it cannot create cultural renewal itself. That has to be retail work by individuals, by families, by neighbors, reconstituting a country in which freedom is lived nobly and freedom is ordered to goodness, not just to willfulness and I did it my way type of attitude, folks. The first step is to recognize that American political culture is in crisis because a public moral culture is in crisis, Weigel writes in the book. But politics and laws cannot resolve the crisis, he says, because politics and law of themselves cannot revitalize the cultural subsoil of American democracy, from which grows the habits of mind and heart that turn democratic self-governance from an aspiration to a capacity. What is needed to resolve the crisis, he concludes, is another great awakening. And then it goes on in the article, and like I said, I'll have the links up to this. It goes on in the article where he actually interviews this. And we do need a great awakening here in America. We need a moral awakening in America, and we must realize, and this is something I really want to pound home here. When he says in this paragraph, because politics and law of themselves cannot revitalize the cultural subsoil of American democracy, from which grows the habits of mind and heart that turns democratic self-governance from an aspiration to a capacity. What the humanist, progressives, social democrats are trying to do is use politics and law to push forth their culture. Because remember, and I lumped these all together, and I think the overriding group would be humanist. For the progressives and the social democrats and even a lot of left-leaning Democrats. The overriding would have to be humanist, is at the top of that pecking order. And since humanists believe that government is God, they believe through politics and through creating laws that they can push the culture. Now, if you just look to the north of us in Canada and Jordan Peterson, who is pushing back against these type of laws as immoral, because what are they doing? The hate speech laws, the pronoun laws for transgenders, that you must use the pronouns of their choice, which Jordan Peterson and myself and others have stated that stifles my freedom of speech. You can't tell me what to say. Governments should not be allowed to tell folks what to say. Now, in the United States, we have protections against government from doing this. And I do believe, since individuals came before government and we have natural rights and there is a natural law out there, according to John Locke, that we had these natural rights before the American government was ever conceived, before the colonies were ever built by England, and before any colonists stepped foot on the continent to start subduing the continent for England to begin with. We have these rights. And I don't believe, and I got a discussion with this gentleman about this, and he just didn't, he has a misunderstanding of the application of rights. He thinks that anybody except the government can disallow my freedom of speech. And I said, that's an error. I said, if I have my property or if I rent a place and I'm not doing anything illegal, you don't have the right to come in and shut down my event where I may be speaking at. I'm talking about like Antifa and Black Lives Matters and leftist protesters that are out there. You don't have a right as a citizen of the United States to stifle somebody else's freedoms. As long as I'm not harming you, As long as I'm not aggressing against you, you don't have any right to take away my freedoms. Now, he didn't understand that at all. He's like, well, they're groups, they're allowed to speak too. That's absolutely right. I'm not denying them their chance to speak. But their type of speech, their protesting, is infringing on my rights. Because let's say either I own the property or I rented the property, and the owner of the property is fine with what I have to say because I'm not going to incite riot, I'm not going to tell people to do illegal things, anything like that, and they're okay with that, and another group comes in and tries to, it's called deplatforming, they try to deplatform me. That's wrong. I know the government may not be doing it, but it's wrong for one citizen to deny another citizen their freedoms, as long as that other citizen isn't aggressing against them. Now, the one thing the humanists will say, and I've seen enough of them say it, and the progressives and the social democrats, well, that's hate speech. But when push comes to shove to ask them to define what hate speech is, they can't define it, or they won't define it. And up in Canada, the same thing. Now, you may think that my speech is hateful, but that doesn't make it hate speech, and that's only your opinion of it. If my speech offends you, it's not my purpose to offend. That responsibility falls to you. If you're offended, that's on you, not me. If my speech offends you, walk away. If my speech offends you so much, go set up your own program and talk about what you thought was offensive about my speech. Put your ideas out in the marketplace of ideas so other Americans can actually see what you're saying, and a civil discourse can take place. What's happening in America today is we don't have a civil discourse anymore. We've gotten away from that. We do not have a civil discourse anymore. And that's wrong. And that's, to me, that's also immoral for us to not sit down and reason things out together. I mean, my goodness, the creator of the heavens and the earth, God himself, Jehovah, was willing to sit down with Isaiah. He told him in Isaiah, the first couple chapters there, let us come reason together, though your sins be scarlet, like scarlet, that your sins are many. God was willing, wanted to sit down and reason, and still wants to sit down and reason with us today through his word. And if God's willing to do that with us, why shouldn't we be able and willing to do that with each other? So Mr. Weigel here in his book, he's talking about how politics cannot and law cannot resolve this crisis, this cultural crisis that we're having today. Morality is the only thing that's going to be able to do that. And it's not man-made morality, it is God's morality. Because man-made morality has brought forth these hate speech laws that are nonsense, that, especially in America, that go against the First Amendment. And trust me, there's people out there say some very hateful things. But we shouldn't shut down their websites. We shouldn't shut down their Twitter feeds. Their ideas should be aired in the light of day so they can be confronted and disposed of through civil public discourse. But the way things are happening now, all these groups that are shutting down or deplatforming people, all they're doing is creating hate and discontent. And again, what they're doing is immoral because they're infringing on somebody else's freedom and liberties. They're infringing on somebody else's freedoms and liberties. And folks, this is a problem. This is a pretty big problem we have here in our country. And it's not going to get any better if we don't start learning from our mistakes and turn the ship of culture, not ship of state, ship of culture around. Because once we turn the culture around, we'll take care of the state. We'll get those swamp monsters out of Washington, D.C. once we get the culture turned around and get it back on the road to morality. But until we do that, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And we see examples of this throughout our society today. We see a lot of examples today at the federal level. Drink ice water there. Folks, this just came out yesterday. Judicial Watch emails show FBI advised Comey to consult with Mueller before Senate testimony. This was after he was fired and while the Mueller investigation was going on. Emails obtained by Judicial Watch through the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, show that James Comey, even though he had been fired from the FBI, from his FBI director position by President Trump on May 9, 2017, was still communicating and receiving guidance from top FBI officials about his pending June 8 testimony before Congress, advice that included him consulting with special counsel Robert Mueller before speaking to Congress. When he was still the FBI director, leaked memos to the New York Times that he believed would trigger the appointment of a special counsel to investigate the president. That tactic worked, as former FBI director and Comey friend Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel on May 17, 2017. So you see, he was fired on May 9th, 2017, and the special counsel was appointed 8 days later. The emails obtained by Judicial Watch from the Department of Justice and FBI show that Comey was advised by FBI officials in May 2017 to consult with special counsel Robert Mueller prior to testifying before the congressional committees regarding Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election and his firing as FBI director, said the watchdog group in a statement. Now, can I say something here real quick? America, yes. Should we, let me start so. Should we protect our vote? Yes. Should we make sure that there's no outside meddling in the voting process here in the United States? Absolutely. But if we're going to do that, we need to stop doing it in other countries ourselves. It's morally reprehensible that we go over and mess around in other countries like Obama did in Israel. It's morally reprehensible that we do that, and yet when something comes up and it could possibly be done to us by the Russians, that we cry foul. That's like the pot calling the kettle black. If we're going to be a moral country, we need to stop doing these things and we're crying about other countries doing to us. And if we're going to have moral leadership, we need to take these guys to task like Comey and like Robert Mueller. The document obtained by Judicial Watch are the first to reveal that high-ranking FBI officials helped Comey coordinate his testimony with Mueller, reads the statement. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton added, these documents show that James Comey, who was fired by the president, nevertheless had easy, friendly access to the FBI as he prepped his infamous anti-Trump testimony to the Senate. This collusion led to Comey's attacking President Trump and misusing FBI records as part of this vendetta against the president. Among the documents is an email chain from May 18th and 19th, 2017, with the subject line, future testimony. Comey had been fired from the FBI May 9th, 2017. In the chain, then FBI Chief of Staff James Rabicki, then Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who was fired in January 2018 by the DOJ for lying to FBI investigators, Assistant FBI Director George Brower, and James Comey discussed Comey's pending testimony. I'm not going to go any further. It's a rather lengthy article, but it goes into these emails. And the reason why I'm doing this, the reason why I'm pointing this out, is because of the immorality in some top officials, in top administration posts in the government. Here we have former FBI Director James Comey colluding with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. He was already appointed a special prosecutor and in cahoots with deputy directors at the FBI to sort of collude about what he was going to say in his testimonies. And I hear boo about this in the lamestream media. This comes from CNS News, one of the best news sources on the web as far as I'm concerned, as far as website news sources. One American News Network is the network I watch all the time. It's not exclusive, but it's my major network that I watch on TV. And I have other sources here, but you don't see a lot of this in the lamestream media because they want to cover. And I'll get to that in a little bit here. about the Russian investigation, how that's a cover for Obama and Hillary and other players in there. So Judicial Watch has these emails that shows this collusion, shows this immorality by individuals at the highest level of a government bureaucracy, the FBI, and the Department of Justice, because that's Robert Mueller works for the Department of Justice as a special investigator. So we see this immorality, and folks, as a nation, as individuals, as sovereign citizens, we cannot have this. We cannot have this immorality going on at the highest levels in any bureaucracy of government, let alone the FBI. And it needs to be rooted out. The FBI needs to know that the American people are watching, and the FBI needs to know that we understand that they have a mandate to protect this country, but they also have a mandate to be truthful and not political. And I know it's hard to separate your politics from your job. But as an investigator, you need to do that. You need to be especially mindful. And you can't do that. You need to recuse yourself from that investigation or get out of that line of work altogether. If you cannot separate your politics from the job. And that James Comey didn't know how to do that. Robert Mueller doesn't know how to do that. McCabe, who's been fired, didn't know how to do that. Page, FBI agent Page, didn't know how to do that. And there's others that don't know how to do that, that are falling by the wayside, that are either resigning or getting caught up in these investigations. So we need to make sure that our executive branch bureaucracies are working with some modicum of morality, but I say that tongue-in-cheek, I think they should have the highest standard of morality. Because we're talking about a bureaucracy that's supposed to be answerable to the people through the President of the United States. And folks, it's just not happening. Our next story that's in line here, this is from the WashingtonTimes.com. IRS Tea Party targeting $3.5 million settlement approved by judge. Now this is let me see here. This is a April 4th article over a month ago, but didn't get a lot of play in the mainstream media. You only heard it on the alternative media or the new Main Street media like CNS News. But this is very important to understand. During the run-up to the, let's see, there'd been the 2012 elections. Matter of fact, starting in 2010, Tea Party activist groups were trying to get their nonprofit status. This is an Associated Press story. Federal judge Wednesday gave preliminary approval to a $3.5 million settlement of a lawsuit against the IRS over alleged targeting of Tea Party groups and other conservative organizations. The U.S. District Judge Michael Barrett set a July 10th hearing in Cincinnati on making settlement final and scheduled deadlines for claims and objections. The Justice Department had announced last year that the case had been settled pending approval of terms. The lead plaintiff was the California-based NorCal Tea Party Patriots. The case swelled into a class action suit by hundreds of groups. The court will decide how much each gets after legal costs. Now I do have, I'm not sure where I have it up here. I've been reading a book about that. I think it's downstairs at my desk, downstairs, but this lady came out, and I'll try to find that, put a link in the show notes page, but she has a whole book about this, about all these cases where all these Tea Party groups are denied the 503C status, I believe it is. The 2013 lawsuit during the Barack Obama administration was over treatment of conservative groups who said they were singled out by extra IRS scrutiny on tax-exempt status applications. These are groups of law-abiding citizens who should have never had their First Amendment rights infringed upon by the IRS. Jenny Beth Martin, president of the Tea Party Patriots umbrella group, said Wednesday, these are groups that want the government to be accountable. And the Justice Department declined to comment on this. I don't want to go any further in there. It's another good article you can go over and read. But it goes to show you this is something that was happening during the 2010 roll up to the midterms. and going into the 2012 presidential race, presidential election, these groups are trying to form these 501(c)(3)s, and they're conservative groups under the Tea Party umbrella, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And Barack Obama and his IRS department was going to have none of it. He wanted things slowed down. And folks, you can't tell me he didn't know about it. Because if he actually didn't know about it, then he was asleep at the wheel and derelict of his duties. And if he did know about it, he orchestrated it as far as telling them what they needed to do. And so we had, in the IRS, we had this, what's her name, Lerner. Lois Lerner was the one they went after, but there was other ones in this story. I'm going to have to get the book name for IRS scandal. Like I said, I have it. I'll have to find it. I was reading it the other day, and I want to try to get through that one completely, but I'll try to find the name of that and put a link up to Amazon where you can get that. But anyway, so a judge finally, back in 2017? No. Well, the suit was in 2013. But they finally settled on damages, and July 10th is going to be the hearing to make the settlement final and schedule deadlines for claims and objections. So it's not quite over with yet, but this federal judge has fined or approved the settlement for a lawsuit against the IRS, $3.5 million. Now, I'm going to try to research and see where the money's coming from to pay this settlement. Hopefully there's some type of insurance. If not, it's going to be taxpayer dollars that's used here, which it shouldn't be, but that's the way things are working right now. But you see what happens when we allow immoral individuals to get into high offices like the IRS, that can be used in such a way to stifle folks' First Amendment freedoms. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. All that right to redress grievances of your government. All these important freedoms that the federal government broke. And I do believe it went all the way up to Barack Obama. Now, you may disagree with me. I'm not trying to pick on him, but I just don't believe that there was anything that went on in his administration he didn't know about or didn't have his fingers in. And so we have this immoral act created by the IRS against Tea Party groups just because they were conservative. And in not allowing them to, there's a lot of people, well, what's the big deal if they didn't get 503 status for, their tax-exempt status? Well, the big deal is they cannot fundraise without that. If they fundraise without that, then they got to pay taxes on that. And nobody's going to give to a foundation like that unless it's a tax-exempt one where they can write off their campaign contributions. Or not campaign, but they can write off their contributions to that because they're tax-exempt. And it stifles fundraising, and that's one of the biggest tool these groups have is fundraising to get their message out, either by TV ads or internet ads or print ads, whatever it is, forming up rallies, gathering up folks to have these rallies and stuff like that to redress their grievances. This was stifled and stopped by Barack Obama's IRS. I cannot emphasize that enough, folks. I cannot emphasize that enough. Now, there's something else that's coming up on my radar. It's been there for a while, but it's this week sort of brought it to the forefront again. Connecticut pledges electoral college votes to popular vote winner. They were called a national vote winner. Okay? Connecticut State Senate has just passed a bill that will allow the state to give its electoral college votes to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote. Connecticut lawmakers passed a bill to join states that have pledged their electoral college votes to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote. The state voted 21-14 to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact on Saturday after the House of Representatives narrowly passed the bill 77-73 last week. The measure now heads to Democrat Governor Daniel P. Malloy, who has indicated he will sign it into law. Now, get their reasoning for this, folks, and this I'll talk about this real quick. The vote of every American citizen should count equally. Yet under the current system, voters from sparsely populated states, like Connecticut, are awarded significantly more power than those from states like Connecticut. And Connecticut isn't that populous of a state compared to other ones. This is fundamentally unfair. The National Popular Vote Compact will ensure an equal vote for every American citizen, regardless of which state it happens to live in. The aim of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is to guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes. By having states pledge all the electoral votes to the candidate who gets the highest vote total nationally, the compact would take effect if states with 98 more electoral votes enact the legislation. At that point, the members would represent a majority of the Electoral College and possess 270 votes needed to elect the president. The compact has grown quickly since Maryland became the first state to join in 2007, but Nate Silver has argued that the movement could be close to hitting a wall. The states that have joined the compact are all solidly Democrat. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton won all of them by double digits in 2012 and 2016. To reach 270 electoral votes, the most contested states, which are the ones that benefit the most from the current system, are some red states that will have to join the compact. President Trump won the 2016 election Electoral College 304 to 227, but lost a popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, making him the fifth president and second in 2 decades to lose popular vote. Now, I want to make a comment about this because there's still some pending lawsuits about some of these votes out in California. Remember on a program a few months back, we were talking about this, where Judicial Watch had asked for documents from 11 counties, 10 of them Democrat, 1 Republican, that had more registered voters on the books than they had registered voters living in the districts. And the overage amount equaled to like 5 million votes. So if you take those votes out, those contested votes, and you take across the country, there was 250,000, I believe it was, here in Pennsylvania, illegal votes cast in Pennsylvania, not just by illegal immigrants, just illegal votes in general. You take all of them across the country, no matter how small they are, Hillary, throw them out, Hillary would not have won the popular vote. So I think one of the first things we need to do is secure our vote. Honestly, I think we need to go back to some type of either paper ballot or if you're going to use electronic machines, there should be a paper trail. I should get a receipt of how I voted. And that should be, given to me at the time of voting. But there's a flaw. There's a flaw in this system, folks. Article 2, Section 1 talks about the Electoral College. It does not give the right of the states to direct how the electors are voted, only in how they are chosen. And I got into a dispute about this with another gentleman on Twitter. I went back and checked my grammar. I went back and looked in a couple law journals about this. And I'm absolutely right on this. If the only direction should be given is if a district, and let me say how the Electoral College is supposed to work. Every state is made up of districts. And the District of Columbia actually has 3 votes. Okay, they were given 3 votes along with the least populous states. So every district is each district is 1 electoral vote, and then you have 2 senatorial votes, okay? What most states do is the winner that takes the most districts in the state gets the 2 senator votes. But as each district comes in for whichever candidate, president and vice president, that's how the electors are supposed to be selected or decided upon. And they should be voting for that district for whatever candidate that district went to. Now, a lot of states, what they've done, they haven't signed on to the compact, but they went in with a winner takes all in their state. Whoever has the most districts, they get all the state's electoral votes. I've often thought that was unconstitutional too, because the state's directing the electors to vote a certain way. It's also robbing electoral votes away from candidates, whether they're Republican or Democrat or Constitution Party. They're robbing those votes away from them. The votes totals should be in the column for whichever candidate that district went for. That is how the Electoral College was initially set up. That's most scholars read Article 2, Section 1 about the Electoral College. They read that way, where they're just supposed to be picked. They're not supposed to tell them how to vote. And too many states are overstepping their bounds because the states created the federal government. They set up the Electoral College, put it in the Constitution. In order to change it, they need a constitutional amendment. I've gotten a lot of pushback about that. No, states can do whatever they want. They can direct their electors. And I said, no, you're misreading that. And matter of fact, one of the things that a lot of people forget about is the Constitution is a limiting document. The founding fathers set out, or the framers set out, to create a federal government, and as Madison said, put it in this lockbox or in this chain of the Constitution. It was a limiting document creating a limited government. Therefore, any statements made in the Constitution or the amendments are limiting also. So you can't take what people have done as the states may direct, as the legislatures of the states may direct, they take that phrase and they expand it out. Well, they can direct them to do anything. No, you have to limit that phrase to exactly what's being said there. You know, the electors shall be appointed, or the state shall appoint, comma, as the legislatures may direct, comma, electors. And I was paraphrasing it. There's a couple commas there, and going back into the grammar and limiting the scope of it because it's in a limiting document. That's the only way it can read. Now, I did share with this one gentleman on Twitter about the article I was reading, but this is another one here in USA Today by Jason Harrow, posted on March 8th. Winner-take-all presidential elections are unconstitutional and must end. There's no legal justification for states' use of winner-take-all. It's an unconstitutional way to pick the electors who cast votes for president. In the Electoral College, winner-take-all is the name of the game in nearly every state. It's why swing states are so crucial. Winning a state by just a few thousand votes can lead to a huge haul of electoral votes, but losing by just a few means going away empty-handed. So winner-take-all leads to millions of votes being tossed out, and to a question few have considered until recently: is the winner-take-all allocation of Electoral College votes even legal? Up to now, most people have thought of winner-take-all as just the weird, quirky way we elect presidents in our country. America has done it this way for centuries. They think this is the system required by the Constitution. They might even think so. Of course it's legal, they conclude. But long-standing practice or tradition doesn't by itself make something legal. The Supreme Court famously reaffirmed this in its recent decision that the states could not continue to define marriage as between one man and one woman just because that's the way it always been defined. Moreover, the winner-take-all system is not required by the Constitution. Instead, the Constitution leaves the choice of allocation of presidential electors up to each state, but that choice is subject to one person, one vote requirement of the Electoral Protection Clause of the Constitution. My organization, Equal Citizens, is working with a bipartisan team of lawyers that filed legal challenges to the winner-take-all system last month in 4 states: California, Massachusetts, Texas, South Carolina. Equal Citizens also ran a crowdfunding campaign to support the project and develop the legal theories underlying the lawsuits. The challenge for winner-takes-all defenders is serious. If we take away that we've always done it that way argument, doesn't matter legally, and it's in the Constitution argument, winner takes all, not in there, and the states can choose presidential electors however they want argument, they can't because they need to comply with the one person, one vote, then the foundation of our current system starts to look less stable. In fact, our system crumbles. It turns out that there's no argument that can legally justify states' use of a winner-take-all to allocate electors. It's an unconstitutional way to pick the presidential electors who ultimately cast votes for president and vice president. That conclusion may seem stunning, but is actually a straightforward application of a principle of fairness and equality of citizenship that has been in our Constitution since the Equal Protection Clause was added following the Civil War. To see why it's important to remember that voters don't actually cast votes for president, but instead vote for a slate of presidential electors expected to support the candidate with a vote in the Electoral College. For example, in 2016, California was entitled to choose 55 presidential electors. And because Hillary got more votes than any other candidate in the state, California used winner take all to select 55 Democratic presidential electors who would all cast votes for Clinton for president. Donald Trump managed to get over 4.5 million votes in California, more than any state he'd won except for Texas and Florida, but they were tossed out. Trump's 4.5 million popular votes translated into 0 presidential electors. See, what I was saying before, winner takes all isn't one person, one vote. Matter of fact, it robs, I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican or Constitution Party or Libertarian or Green Party or whatever, if that person running for president in that party won that district, that vote goes to that person, period. Winner takes all is a crock. It is a real crock, and it's, Pennsylvania has argued for this because that's what we have out here. They've argued about this. Well, it'll remove us from being a swing state if we don't have winner takes all. So what? So what? Well, there's too many politicians that like the public eye, like the national eye on Pennsylvania during elections because we're a swing state. And that's not the way it should be. The winner of that state shouldn't take all because they didn't earn them all. If you want to be fair and equal about it, and again, going back to the question of the national popular vote, the president is not elected by popular vote. It never has. And not that it was a main argument, which it really wasn't, but the founding fathers despised democracy. And here's where the morality comes in. They despised bureaucracy, and they thought it would slip into mob mentality. And that's exactly what's going to happen if we allow this national popular vote to stand without challenge. I'm glad this group is challenging that, because we're going to have the mob in the Northeast and on the West Coast dictating to the rest of the country who's going to be president. Now, California, and I've read articles about this, California cries that Montana, so sparsely populated, has 3 electoral votes in Montana. And California has 55. But they're 3 way out more than their 55. The reason why, and this, to me, this is the perfect reason why they have an electoral college, is because the framers of the Constitution wanted to make sure that every state had a say in who became president of the United States. That every state, if we go to the national popular vote, they're not going to have to go over most of flyover country. They're not going to have to go to Montana. All they got to do is go to these populous states with these huge population centers on the East Coast and the West Coast and not worry about the rest of us. Now, how's that fair to the rest of us? It isn't. So we need to put a kibosh on the national popular vote compact, state compacts. We need to start taking these states to court about winner takes all and get it back to the one man, one vote idea of the Constitution and of most any democracy. Even though we're a republic, these folks that want these things want a democracy, which is immoral. In my opinion, it is totally immoral, because 51% of the people can vote to strip your rights away from you in a democracy. Only takes 51%. In a constitutional republic, it takes the process is long and arduous, and people don't want to go down that road. People don't want to go down that road. So this national popular vote's like an end run around the Constitution, which again is immoral. If you want to change the Constitution, change it. Go through the process to change it. I know it's been tried like 1,000 times in our country's history to change the Electoral College, and they've never gone anywhere. And the most reason why is because it won't pass the other states. The states that'll hurt the most, they're not going to agree with this, and there's more of those type of states than there are other states, which I know that argument's going to come out that, well, they shouldn't have as much say as these other states. Well, again, then you're just trying to dismantle our republic, and our republic actually protects the rights, freedoms, and liberties of its citizens over a democracy. Democracy has no need or no desire to protect our rights, freedoms, and our liberties if 51% of the people say it doesn't. So again, I'm just sort of pointing out some immoralities here. I got a couple more articles to get through here real quick. I'm not gonna really hammer all these out and read into them. I'm just gonna sum them up from what I read. Washington Times, and this is by L. Todd Wood, posted Saturday, May 5th. Russia investigation isn't really about Trump, but giving cover to Obama and Hillary. Those of us to the right of the political center in America, patriots who yearn for the return of rule of law and the righteous American ideas of freedom and equal justice, look with shock and disbelief at the legal charade and mockery of the Constitution, which plays itself out every night on our televisions and our living rooms across this great land. We truly can't understand why this witch hunt gone wild is allowed to continue. We don't understand why someone in power in the Department of Justice won't stand up and end what is obviously a deep state coup against a duly elected President of the United States. Well, I've been writing about this for some time, but I think it's time I said it again because the answer to these questions is very simple. The investigation is not about Trump. It's about Barack Hussein Obama, and Hillary Clinton. Rod Rosenstein, Robert Mueller, and the rest of their merry band of brothers know one thing all too clearly. They're not there to prosecute Trump. That is only a tactic to achieve the real goal. This entire drama has been played out to not to indict Trump, but to prevent the country from understanding how truly depraved, traitorous, and duplicitous the regime of Barack Hussein Obama really was. They cannot stop the investigation because if they do, Hillary, Obama, Kerry, Jarrett, and all of them go directly to jail without passing go. Mueller's not a special prosecutor. He is a goalie meant only to protect the truth from coming out. In Russia, when Boris Yeltsin's health was failing and it was obvious it was time for a new leader, good old Boris chose Vladimir Putin. Why? Because he was assured Putin would not prosecute his family for the billions and billions they had stolen by raping the country they were supposed to lead. When Hillary lost the election, the left in America was shocked. Hillary was supposed to play Putin's role to prevent anyone from finding out how deep the Hussein rabbit hole of treason really went. This is why Hillary famously apologized to Barack when she lost. "I'm sorry, Barack," she said. When it was obvious Trump was going to win, they had to come up with another plan. I have to admit the plan was created with evil genius. They decided to try and bring down Trump with an orchestrated campaign to find or create some type of Russia collusion to stop his agenda, delegitimize his presidency, and buy time to install another goalie in the White House. Barack and his merry band of traitors weakened America on purpose. They moved hundreds of billions of dollars to their fat cat bosses in the union sector. They almost destroyed our military. They betrayed us to our enemies. They betrayed our allies. They divided us by race. In short, they did their best to destroy this great country and get rich at the same time. As this preacher famously said, "Goddamn America," and those white people too. And that was Barack Obama's preacher. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. Out there at the United Church of Christ, out there around Illinois or Chicago. And I'll come up with it after the show, and I'll go, no, Miller can't stop. If he does, the entire house of cards comes crashing down. The left will be finished in America for a generation. Barack, Valerie, Hillary, and the rest of them will go to the big house. Then we find out the real extent of their crimes against the people. This is why Mueller will stop at nothing to remove Trump or run out the clock till the next presidential election. This is why DOJ won't release data to Congress. This is why the media is completely complicit. This is why Peter Strzok still has a job at the FBI. This is why Rod Rosenstein is so arrogant and obstructionist. They will stop at nothing. The alternative is life in prison. They still may get it anyway. And I think, honestly, folks, I think if Donald Trump keeps pushing the way he's going, he's going to have, he may not fire Mueller. And I've been thinking about this for a while. He doesn't really have to fire Mueller. He can get rid of guys like Rosenstein and like Strzok and other guys in the Department of Justice. He can get rid of them and elevate people that are going to do the job. they're going to look at this and say how much of a farce this is and actually have them shut down Mueller, saying you're well beyond your mandate. Matter of fact, Congress is asking, and they still haven't got it. The judge in Virginia, we talked about this, Mr. Ellis, T.S. Ellis, the third in Virginia, has given the Department of Justice just a couple weeks to give him the scope of the Mueller investigation, unredacted. Congress has asked for the same thing, unredacted. Oh, there's national security implications here. You can say that about anything. And if you're worried about that, Congress can look at it as a secure location if you're worried about national security. But I don't think there is. I think that's just them using that excuse for not producing these materials. And I think eventually this whole house of cards, it's falling apart now. A lot of them don't see it, but it is falling apart now, especially with this T.S. Ellis judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. I think he's going to bring this house of cards down all by himself. I really do. So we have this immorality that was in the last administration for 8 years under the direction of Barack Hussein Obama. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama has still not answered for the lives that were lost in Benghazi. They still haven't answered Barack Obama and his AG at the time for the Fast and Furious gun running, and Border Patrolmen were killed with the guns that they let loose out there. And all the other atrocities that were happening in the Barack Hussein Obama administration. A lot of immoral things, a lot of impeachable things happened there, and Congress didn't have the backbone to do it, and the reason why was because, oh, he was the first black president. How's that going to make us look if we impeach him? Well, it's going to make you look like you're doing your jobs because you're following the rule of law, which Obama and his administration didn't. And Hillary Clinton especially, she's not only involved and has blood on her hands with Benghazi, she also has the email server scandal. She also has the Clinton Foundation to pay to play there. They were gearing up for her being the President of the United States, and money was flowing in hand over fist at the Clinton Foundation. And I'm just still wondering how many of those donors want their money back since Hillary Clinton's not in a position of power anymore. There's no way Hillary Clinton can protect herself or anybody else. Only her sycophants in government can do that. And they're acting very, very immorally. Again, America's lost its moral compass. It really has. And it shows in the departments, in our bureaucracies. Here's another good one that I'm just applauding all over the place. Donald Trump pulls Fed out of K-12 education. Now, it hasn't done it yet, but he's directing... President Trump signed an executive order Wednesday to start pulling the federal government out of K-12 education, following through on a campaign promise to return school control to state and local officials. The order, dubbed the Educational Federation Executive Order, which he did do that, and they made big fanfare about this, will launch a 300-day review by Obama-era regulations and guidance for school districts and direct Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to modify or repeal measures she deems an overreach by the federal government. And the left is going apoplectic, folks. They are beside themselves. And it's funny to watch them. Because this is how, remember in the beginning, we're talking about the New Great Awakening, that, it can't be done, the culture can't be changed through politics and law. But this is how the humanist, progressive, social democratic left seeks to do these things. They seek to change the culture by changing politics and changing the law. And they put a Common Core. A lot of states have just totally rejected Common Core altogether and gotten rid of it, because and there's nothing good about it. And this came down from the federal government. So what Donald Trump's trying to do is just get the federal government out of the education business, which is unconstitutional for us to be in to begin with. It's called the rule of law. It's called being moral, following the rule of law. That's being moral, because it's a good law, because it's not in there. It's not in the Constitution, folks. It's not one of the enumerated powers. And Betsy DeVos they tried to stop her on numerous occasions to go speak at these different schools and stuff like that. and she snuck in anyway. I got to give kudos to her. She snuck in anyway, and gave her speech and gave her talk. And honestly, the federal teachers union and stuff like that, once the Department of Education shut down, they're not going to have a whole lot of power. Who are they going to lobby? You know what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to lobby each state individually. And that's going to cost them a lot of money. And they don't want to do that. They'd rather go to one-stop shopping in the federal government. So President Trump has ordered a 300-day review of Obama-era regulations and guidance to school districts and direct Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to modify or repeal measures she deems an overreach by the federal government. The whole department's a federal overreach, so it's not going to be hard for her to find those things. It is not going to be hard for her to find those things. And I say kudos to the President of the United States because he's following the Constitution, getting rid of these unconstitutional departments. And I hope Department of Interior is next. I hope Department of Energy, the EPA. I hope a lot of these unconstitutional bureaucracies go by the wayside. I got in a discussion with this one guy. He said, well, the president, no, it was a woman. President can't fire these employees because they're union employees. No, he can't. He may not be able to fire them, but if he shuts down the bureaucracy that they work in, guess what? If there's no bureaucracy there, there's no job, so there's no firing. He just laid them off. And they're not coming back. And this is great. The Humanist left, I keep a track on a couple shows on YouTube about this. They're going nuts about this. They're just beside themselves. How dare they? They were beside themselves when Chairman Pai of the FCC did away with net neutrality. And you can't convince them. That's just going to be another, if net neutrality stayed, it was going to be another overreaching government bureaucracy that we don't need. Couldn't convince them of that. Couldn't convince them that free markets will take care of bad actors. Couldn't convince them of that. They'd rather trust government than trust the people. And that says something. That says something about these humanist groups. And one of the things that really says about them, and this is the last article we'll get into today, is Karl Marx, people celebrating his 200th birthday. And this story comes from evolutionnews.org by David Klinghoffer, put out May 3rd of this year. Born on May 5, 1818, Karl Marx turns 200 years old this Saturday. So let's consider the following question. Does Darwinism lend support more naturally to a capitalist moral economic perspective or some other competing political standpoint or philosophical standpoint, say a Marxist one? Economic, and folks, this may not be where you're thinking about it's going to go, but hang in there. Economic historian Niall Ferguson argued on behalf of the former view in a 2008 book, The Ascent of Money, A Financial History of the World, for applying a Darwinian framework to understanding market forces. He was taken to task by a number of reviewers in the New York, these attempts to explain the rise of money in terms of natural process strike me as being both morally and philosophically naive. Now, I'm going to disagree with Mr. Skidlewski that he is wrong in this. Ferguson describes the creative destruction that comes about with a question mark. Unless your moral, political, and philosophical ideas are completely untethered to reality, then the way you picture in your mind the rules by which the world does work should have some impact on the way you think it should work. So the various answers that have been offered to the question of how life developed naturally lend themselves to the construction of philosophies that answer other moral or more practical questions, including how human fulfillment is achieved in an economic realm. And why not the notion that theories of evolution properly contribute nothing to theories of how wealth is created and divided under the power of a Darwinian mechanism, that too has consequences, probably different ones. The problem comes in determining what those consequences are. I haven't read Ferguson's book, but it sounds like he's offering the traditional Darwinian tautology. The fittest firms survive. And what in economic history defines fitness? Well, survival, because you see, those that survive are those that survive. And folks, I want to stop the reading there real quick. And go back up. Let me go back up to the term. I got to get back up to this term here. Creative. Let me highlight that. Creative destruction. Now, I've been studying Austrian economics for a while now, and this is one of the tenets of that. Creative destruction. When the horse and buggy era ended, nobody tried to keep around the whip builders or the buggy builders or the harness builders because we had the automobile. Things shifted. Did it destroy the shifting? Did it destroy the buggy industry? Absolutely. But did it create something in its place? Absolutely. That is what's called creative destruction. And if you think about, at its basic, Austrian economics is Darwinian in nature, because it's, you see, those who survive are those that survive. Survival of the fittest. It's called competition. Ferguson traces his idea that Darwinian processes may be at work in the economy back to Thorstein Veblen, who first posed the question, why is economics not an evolutionary science? Implying that it really was, as long ago as 1898. But the truth is that economic thinking that claims to be based on evolutionary science goes back decades before that. And this gets into Karl Marx, and I don't want to get all the way into it. I want you to read this for yourself. About, just real quick, I want to read this one last paragraph. In the preface to Capital in 1864, Karl Marx heralded his own ideas as presenting the development of the economic formation of society as a process in natural history. In his own oration at Marx's funeral in London's Highgate Cemetery, Engels gave the ultimate compliment. As Darwin discovered the laws of evolution in organic nature, Marx discovered the law of evolution in human history. That was March 17th, 1883. This is very important for us to understand, because what is happening here is, and I don't want to get into the whole philosophy of Marx. I don't want to get off on that tangent. But we know Marxism doesn't work. Everywhere it's been tried, it doesn't work. We know that fascism doesn't work. We know that socialism, communism doesn't work, which all four of those are part of an authoritarian ideology of governance. Marx was pitting the haves against the have-nots, the producers against those who own the means of production. And it was always a struggle there. And I always believed that to be an immoral thing to do, to pit these folks. And it's still going on today. I defend capitalism, free market capitalism, in every chance I get. Every time I see something stupid put on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, I defend free market capitalism. And inevitably go back to one of the basics of Karl Marx, the bourgeoisie, you know, those that own the means of productions versus those that actually do the work of production, and how that's disproportionate, and how you set these classes against each other, and that's how you come up with Marxism. That's how you come up with socialism, and that's how you get communism, by having class warfare. That, well, see, these people, they make so many 100 times more than you do annually. But you do all the work for them. But Mr. Marx, they're getting paid for their work. They're getting paid. They're not risking their money. They're not risking any money at all by going to work for somebody. The person who's risking it is the person who owns the business. They had to get capital in order to start the business, whether their own or they borrowed it, and invest it in infrastructure for their business. So people have a place to come to work, so they make a living, and the person who owns it has a return on his investment. But see, in Karl Marx's eyes, that's evil. But in a moral society, one that's built on a godly morality, there's no evil in that. The only evil that would come out of that, and this is judged on individual basis, you don't throw the whole, what a lot of people do today is they throw all corporations in, saying all corporations are evil and need to be destroyed. And that's one of the last things I want to talk about today is about how folks like Karl Marx, these humanist, progressive, social democrats, they do not like individuals. They want to lump us all into groups and treat us all as a group instead of treating us as God-breathing individuals, as God created us, as individuals, as sovereign individuals in this country. Matter of fact, everybody across the world is a sovereign individual. Just some countries don't recognize that. America, in our founding, they recognize that we are sovereign individuals over the government. And we need to be treated as sovereign individuals. And a lot of this stuff, what's happening in our country today, this immorality that's going on, they don't recognize the rights of the individual, like the IRS in denying Tea Party groups 503C status. We have testimony by top FBI officials that was testimony that denied the existence of the individual. It was all about groups. And President Obama did more to destroy the culture and the fabric of America than I think any other president in the history of our country and his administration. Just by denying the truth about individuals. Just about denying that. And so we have this whole thing has been orchestrated from a very dark corner of our society. It's humanism. Go back to our beginning thesis, I guess, is the goals of humanism. And a lot of what I read through these articles were goals of humanism. They need this. They need this in order for humanism to flourish. They need the idea of God to be taken out of society. They need the idea of we evolved. That's why they support evolution, even though there's no scientific proof that evolution ever took place. There's more evidence that we are created in the natural world than there ever will be on evolution. But they deny that. They deny scientists that want to look into, it's called creation science. They want to deny them. They want to deny individuals of their rights and their freedoms and their liberties because they want to lump them in groups and treat everybody as a group. And it just, folks, it goes on and on and on in our country. And that's why I'm saying that we need a moral citizenry. We need to get the citizens, the individuals, back to a moral center. Back to a godly moral center. See, I said it. And that's why I ended the title of the show today, God Save the Republic. Because God, through individuals, is the only way that we're going to turn the culture around our country to honor God, to stop. Folks, I didn't even get into the evils of Planned Parenthood. That takes up a whole show by itself. But why the United States has allowed this evil to go on for as long as it has is a disgrace to the country and disgrace to every individual out there. And we need to work harder on getting rid of this evil that is Planned Parenthood and abortion. There's a lot of evils that need to be tackled, but first, before we can tackle these evils, we must have a moral compass that we need to understand that. And until we do that, we're not going to be able to correct anything in the federal government. We're not going to be able to correct anything at the state or local level if there's corruption there. Because corrupt people cannot root out corruption. Because what happens is they get rid of those corrupt people and then they bring their own corruption in. They have no moral base. And I believe humanism is at the root of all this. Because humanism in and of itself has no moral base. It has what they perceive to be morality, and if you don't agree with their ideas of society, they want to take you out of the way. And how moral is that, folks? How moral is that? And again, I can't emphasize that enough. I really can't. All right, folks, that's the music. We're at the end of the show. Fear not, I'll be back with you in the next video. This has been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. And remember, if you aim at something or if you aim at nothing, excuse me, I'll get this straight here. If you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Again, have a great rest of the day, and God bless, and we'll see you in the next video. And if you like what you hear on the show here, folks, please subscribe to it, hit the notification button so you know when I put new videos out. Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Please leave your comments, any questions down in the comment section. Please share the video, because that's how I get known, is by sharing these videos. And if you really enjoyed what you listened to and you want to help support and grow this channel with me, I have a Patreon account set up, and I also have a PayPal account set up that you can go to over thedancolumbusShow.com and click on those links. They'll take you to either PayPal or the Patreon to support me. So again, have a great rest of the day, and God bless, and we'll see you on the next video.